interviewed. And it's an honor for the IGME and the FMES to have you answering these questions, because this will benefit a lot of young people who are going to have the opportunity to listen to people.
It's an honor for me to be asked, so thank you.
And the issue that has been very important for in the context of India, because of the various new trials that are coming up, is the very important issue up to now, which has been within a vulnerability framework, where pregnant women have not or avoided, not included in many clinical trials. And the discourse now from the ethics perspective has been that provide a reason for why you want to exclude them, because if you're going to come up with some medication, it needs to be to be something that can be used for them as well. And given these conflicting opinions that exist, it would be very helpful to know what you think would be the right way to go, and whether we should have pregnant women in clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a long-standing debate. Now, I come from the United States, and for very many years, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, had a clause in its, or a statement in its guidelines that basically denied women the entry into clinical trials. The aim, of course, was to protect the fetus, and the belief was that starting a clinical trial when the woman is pregnant may harm the fetus, because after all it is research and we don't know what the consequences were. This set of beliefs came about after a tragedy that occurred, a very large tragedy, when research was not conducted in pregnant women and resulted in horribly deformed babies. This was in the 1950s. The drug was thalidomide, and thalidomide was a drug that was used in pregnancy, basically it was a small drug, not a serious drug for illness, but it was to combat some of the ills in pregnancy, nausea and bad feelings. In the United States, they did not use the drug for pregnant women. But in Europe, thousands of babies were born with deformed limbs. They didn't have shortened arms and shortened legs, and of course there was no cure for that. So after that, the horror of that happening led people to say, well, we should never use drugs for pregnant studies with pregnant women. My view is that was exactly the wrong decision. Had they studied a few pregnant women, we always have a very few pregnant women or persons in trials at the very beginning, they would have discovered this in very few people. Instead, they never tested it in pregnant women, and there were thousands and thousands of deformed babies. So that's a lesson that I took for the inclusion of pregnant women, of course with their informed consent. So for very many years, the FDA in the United States had a presumption against the inclusion. In fact, in the early time, it was against the inclusion of women of childbearing potential, which meant they didn't even, maybe they were pregnant, or maybe they weren't pregnant, but they were pregnant and didn't know it. That changed in the early to mid-1990s, the exclusion of women of childbearing potential, but there was still essentially a prohibition of involving pregnant women. For their part, the drug companies, and we're talking here about the worries that a drug is going to cause some kind of birth defect, but the drug companies were afraid of liability, legal liability, because if there were to be some bad effects, birth defects of some sort in the fetus, the fear was that they would be sued. And they didn't want to be sued, or they didn't want to take the chance of being sued. Furthermore, there were many people, researchers, such as the ones on the Research Ethics Committee on which I sat for very many years in my institution, 32 years, sitting on the Research Ethics Committee, that whenever the question, we would read the protocols that came from the drug companies, and it said either that women were not to be in the study at all, and that was a long time ago, because now there is a mandate to include women as well as men in studies. But the women are supposed to have used 2 forms of contraception. Now, there's no monitor in their home, and the idea of using 2 forms of contraception during a study is quite unrealistic. Nevertheless, that's what the protocols say.
Was it for the partner and the woman? It was
Well, yes, for the woman. In other words, to prevent her pregnancy during the trial. If women were in the trial, she was supposed to use 2 forms of effective contraception to prevent pregnancy during the trial. And most drug companies sponsored trials had that clause in there. So women could be involved as women of childbearing potential, but only with the use of 2 forms of contraception. Whether they did it in their bedroom at night, there were no cameras in there to see what happened. More recently, and again, I'm talking about the United States, there has been an argument in favor of involving women known to be pregnant in studies. And the reason is quite obvious. Doctors give drugs to pregnant women when they're sick, whatever their illness is. Now, there are some exceptions. I do know that in some Latin American countries where abortion is not legal in any of those countries, except in some cases because of rape or the life of the mother, but in ordinary circumstances. And in those cases, the protection, the fetal protection on religious grounds is very strong. And in those countries in Latin America, they would never involve pregnant women in any studies, and there are even questions about whether doctors should be using drugs for women who are sick, not in studies, but because of a possible harm to the fetus. So there has been an evolution in the United States, and abortion is, I'm going to say abortion is still legal in the United States, but there is a great deal of opposition, and in some individual states. The laws are all individual state by state in the United States, and there are some states that are making it very difficult for women to have abortion. There may be one abortion provider in an entire state, in the capital, for example. But that's a side question about the abortion, but of course it is related, because if women are in trials, and if there is some way of determining during the pregnancy that there is harm to the fetus, whether it would involve ultrasound or some other method of determining that there's harm to the fetus, then of course, if abortion is legally available, that should be an option for the woman. But there are 2 kinds of circumstances in which pregnant women might be involved. One is one in which there exists a drug on the market that has never been tested in pregnant women, and physicians prescribe that drug. So when women need it. So the question there is, without any information about the effects of that drug in pregnancy, shouldn't there be trials that are now begun so something is known about the effects on women? Because, in fact, it is well known that women metabolize drugs differently from men, and there are differences in men and women. So it's been tested in women, but not in pregnant women, but doctors prescribe the drug. So that's one context. The other context is one in which it's a brand new drug, never been tested before in men or women. It may be similar, as many pharmaceutical industry drugs are. They're big blockbuster drugs, similar to one that's already on the market, and of course, the drug company wants to beat out its competitor. So that's a little bit more controversial because the effects aren't even known on non-pregnant people. And there were some things in the literature that I have read. They're detailed and a little bit too detailed for me to be able to describe them now. But people have proposed ways of phasing in the trial, of doing the early phases in non-pregnant women to see what the effect is of a brand new drug, and then only after it's been demonstrated let's say through phase 2 of the 3-phase drug trial, then to enroll pregnant women in the same trial, but after the non-pregnant women. So there are different proposals for this. Clearly, the less is known about the drug before. If it's a brand new drug, there is greater risk. But my view is really twofold. This is my personal view. One is that these kinds of studies should be done only in places where abortion is legally available, legally permissible, or when there might be an opportunity for women to leave that country or the United States, that particular state, and go elsewhere to a neighboring country. Because to place the woman with the fetus possibly at risk, not at known risk, because some drugs don't have any effect on the fetus, that would be, in my view, unethical, if not to let the woman have the choice or the option of having an abortion. One other thing, this is about the phases of the drug trials. Some people have argued that pregnant women should never be in the phase 1 study because that's looking at the harm that could happen. It's only studying safety and toxicity. But the argument there is that there are very few women, very few people in any phase 1 study. So if there is some possible harm, it's very few people, women, are going to be affected by it. So if the women only enter phase 2, when it's shown to be safe in non-pregnant women, it's still not clear, and there are more people in phase 2. So this is really a question of how few or how many should be subjected to any unknown risks in these cases.
Is there a different argument that we can use if it is a medication or a drug that is suitable only for pregnant people?
Well, those studies have been done for a long time.
Okay.
I mean,
any
studies, no, actually, we probably should have said that at the beginning. The only drug studies, historically, that have been done are those that are supposed to be beneficial during pregnancy, either for the woman or possibly for the fetus or both. So in the regulations, the government regulations in the United States, there's a whole section on research involving that would involve the fetus. And there are two separate parts. One is research that's directed at the health of the woman, and the other research that's directed only at the health of the fetus, and research that's directed at the health of both the woman and the fetus. But of course, if it's something, for example, a drug to prevent a miscarriage, obviously, this is presumed to benefit the woman, not necessarily the fetus, but certainly to benefit the woman, possibly the fetus, if those who believe that the fetus has a personhood, I mean, all of those kinds of arguments. So those arguments are completely different. This question of abortion might still arise in those cases, but there, the point of benefiting the pregnant woman is the studies that have been done.
There is now there's a bit of information that is coming in from certain other trials on HIV, which have drugs which have proved to be very effective, but for the woman, but if she's pregnant, seems to cause certain birth defects in children. Now, you were just telling us that the context in which the studies of the other kind where pregnant women going to be subject to clinical trials, you were talking about the option of having empty abortions in those countries and undertaking them now. A lot of these trials are likely to happen in a range of countries. Mm-hmm. So should we revisit the choice about which sites we choose for undertaking those kinds of studies?
Well, I have once argued, I was on a committee for a long time at the World Health Organization in their Department of Reproductive Health and Research. And I was a member of the Research Ethics Committee at the WHO. And I made an argument there, this is not within the context of this HIV study, which I'll come back to, but I made an argument there that only in places where abortion is legally available should trials like that be made, and people objected to that. I had a good friend, a colleague from Chile, where abortion, at that time, abortion was prohibited for any reason whatsoever, including to save the life of the woman. But yet he argued that it was important to do studies in the place where the research would be done. So there are two sides to that argument, because if you're going to introduce a drug into a country, in some places you have to do the research in the country where the drug is going to be introduced. So let's come back to the HIV case, which I happen to know about because I sit on another committee in the United States. It's a committee that looks at the it's a scientific advisory committee for the program known as PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Relief, the President's Emergency Relief for HIV. And here's what the information that I received there. A new drug added to what they call the cocktail, the drug cocktail for HIV, is known to be very beneficial for women who are HIV positive, simply to prevent relapse and to prevent worsening of HIV. The trial is in progress now, and it was discovered from some of the early results of this product that there was an incidence of birth defects, neural tube defects in infants from the study. So one question that arose about this is when there is a study that now has a known, it's not every baby, unlike the thalidomide, which I talked about before, that was just highly toxic to almost everybody. But this is some babies in the study, in what they're studying, were found to have neural tube defects after they were born, and others not. So the debate here is whether the trial should continue, even with the known defects or known problems of the birth defects for the fetus. Or whether there should be an option for the women to opt out of the trial. I mean, the debates about protecting the women with the drug or having the birth defects with the fetus, and the tentative decision, not a complete decision yet taken, was let's see the incidents and let the trial go forward. Now, the problem here is there is a way of detecting neural tube defects in utero. And I mean, I'm not a medical scientist, I'm a bioethicist, my background's in philosophy. And to me, the obvious thing to do is enable the trial to continue, but do a very early test. It can be a very early test, I believe it's 6 weeks, but I'm not sure, in pregnancy, when abortion is available, legally available in the United States. And that's a win-win situation. Now, of course, people who are unalterably opposed to abortion will be opposed to it, but then there is, of course, the birth of an afflicted child, which the parents may not have the means or desire to take care of, and the question of enabling or allowing a child with a serious birth defect to come into the world when that can be prevented for that child, simply that future child, by abortion. So this is a complicated picture that pits the pregnant woman against the fetus, benefit to the fetus, harm to the fetus, benefit to the woman, but it can be avoided and evaded by simply deciding to introduce into the trial the kind of study or to detect the neural tube defect.
Yes, detect it and offer options. So
yes,
the choice can be that of the woman.
Yes, the choice, it should be that of the woman. I mean, no one should force a woman to have an abortion, and in my view, no one should prevent a woman to have an abortion where it's legally available. Of course, where it's in countries, the trial is going on in a number of different countries, but still, the people who are doing the trial have the means and the availability to do to detect the neural tube defects during pregnancy.
And offer options.
I'm not sure exactly what is the contemporary. I heard about this several months ago, so I'm not sure how it's evolved because they haven't heard anything lately.
That was really very good because it would help them to understand, and it also brings us to a lot of debates that are going on in India itself. So thank you very much.
Okay, you're quite welcome.
Thank you.